So joined by the Wandering Investor. He's one of the most knowledgeable guys I know in terms of frontier property market. He does it as a full-time job. He travels the world investing for his own. He's just invested for a close family member. He's in Medellin, Colombia. Please, Ladislas, tell us about yourself and where you see the property market in, 2023 and the opportunities for a lot of potential investors.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me on, Henry. So,
No,
Happy New Year.
cheers, thank you.
So, so a bit of as a bit of a background, I was in corporate for quite a while. My last role was sitting on the executive board of Nestle Ghana in West Africa, running the milk business for Nestle in a few West African countries. After a few years of doing this, I left, and since then, I've been a full-time investor, traveling all over the world, making a lot of real estate investments, and more specifically in emerging and frontier markets. So it's really what I specialize on. I invest in the stock market and private deals as well, et cetera, et cetera. But my core focus has been frontier market and emerging market real estate. So for 2023, look, it's hard to predict anything, right?
Yeah.
But when we look at the current trajectory of interest rates, if this is going to continue, I am very bearish Western developed market real estate.
Okay.
So for a few reasons. So one, interest rates going up. So
Yes.
this means that people who want to get onto the property ladder, it's more expensive for them. And in countries where there are a lot of variable mortgages based on variable rates, people are going to have to sell. So it really depends on the market. So you go to places like Portugal, where approximately 90% of mortgages are based on variable rates. That's very bearish. Spain, approximately 75% bearish. France, almost none, so less bearish in France because you don't have the urge to sell. You just have less of an incentive to buy. And then the UK, I'm not too sure the percentage of variable interest rates, but I know that you guys do have, I think, between 25 and 50% variable interest rates. So, and US again, mostly fixed rate, so a bit less bearish. So it really depends on the markets, but overall, rising interest rates are a net negative for housing markets, for valuations, and to which degree depends on whether it's mostly fixed rate or variable rate. So that's one aspect. The second one is inflation. When there's inflation, it simply means that people are going to be able to save less money. So they're going to have less money for the deposit. That's simple. And just as banks are tightening, they're asking for bigger deposits. So 2-3 years ago, you could get away with in some countries 0% down payments. I remember in France 3 years ago, you can get mortgages for 110% to cover the notary fees. So that's gone. So, again, negative catalyst for real estate. So as long as this trend continues, I would not view Western safe haven as either a good speculation or even as a good safe haven, unless you go into markets that were never really impacted by, a boom.
It's not much of that, no.
Exactly. So I'd stay away from that sort of real estate. So what sort of real estate am I rather looking at? I'm looking at emerging markets where interest rates just do not have an impact on the housing market because there simply aren't any mortgages or barely any mortgages, or the interest rates were already very high. So, if you go from 10% to 12%, whatever, it just doesn't actually change anything for anyone because no one had mortgages. Or if they did, it was just a bridge loan. So investing in these markets counterintuitively is actually safer than investing in Western developed markets, as long as these interest rates keep going up.
Agree with that.
So, and then which markets do you want to go for? Well, ideally, if we are entering a world of constrained resources, or at least dislocated markets for natural resources, the way we're seeing in oil and gas, for example. Um, Countries that produce energy are probably interesting as well, because that'll help at least sustain their currencies. Because one of the issues with investing in emerging and frontier markets, the currencies are always going down. So
Yeah.
it's actually quite hard in many cases to make substantial capital gains. So if we do have this catalyst that materializes of higher energy prices for these countries, it'll help them with their current account and by definition also with their currencies. So I'm looking at countries like Colombia, for example, where I am right now. I'm helping, as you mentioned, a close family member of mine make an investment here. Places like Brazil could potentially be interesting to some degree. Mexico, the Middle East, though personally, I don't want to take that whole political risk.
Yeah.
So these are markets that could potentially do better than others. Potentially in your part of the world in Southeast Asia, maybe Malaysia would be doing a bit better than a lot of countries. Maybe it's a bit safer to buy there. I'm not
Yeah.
too sure about their interest rate policies, but that's kind of the space that I'm looking at. We're not looking at a world where you can just buy real estate and get rich. These days are over. It's more about capital preservation. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at countries with limited downside. So where structurally it's just hard to have a downside in terms of prices. So countries that are already cheap with interest rate policies that don't matter, where the cash flow is good, so that if bad things happen, which invariably happens
Yeah.
in emerging markets,
Yes. Yeah.
right, in
You've got
frontier
a lot of
markets,
political instability in places like Cambodia, Brazil right now.
exactly. At least your downside is pretty limited.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Medellin right now, and you get core real estate for less than 1,500 USD a square meter, fully renovated, gorgeous apartments.
Insane.
So, and you get net yields of 8 to 9% if you rent out to on the midterm market to digital nomads.
Yeah.
So, I mean, your downside's pretty limited. Like when you're making
That,
8 to 9% cap rates
that seems a
and you're
lot
paying less
safer
than,
than investing
yeah,
in property in the West right now. Really.
yeah, it's safer than buying in London.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
Sure, Colombia just elected a communist, uh, like a former guerrilla who was in the jungle. So, I mean, that's not very reassuring. But then, so he came with this whole narrative of blah, blah, communist, the currency sold off immediately over like 20% the day he was elected. But then what has he done? Actually, he has gotten a bit closer to Venezuela.
Open
Politically,
up the
he's opened the
borders.
borders.
Yeah.
There's trade going on again. Again, it's in Colombia's self-interest to be doing business with its neighbor. The only reason they weren't doing business with the neighbor is because they were getting in line with U.S. foreign policy, which inherently was not in their own benefit, in their own interest.
Yeah.
They're the He signed a peace deal with I think 4 Marxist guerrillas. So whilst we have in our countries politicians that are rather focusing on war, he's rather
Mhm.
focusing on peace.
Yeah.
And he came during the election campaign. It was quite worrying. He was going around talking about how he would ban exploration, how there would be these massive windfall taxes on oil and gas, on mining, etc. And when you look at Colombia's exports, it's 50% energy, it's oil and coal.
Yeah.
So that was pretty worrying. He came to power. He doesn't control the local Senate. So they did the whole reform of the energy space in terms of taxes. And then it turns out the extra windfall tax is 15% on a sliding scale.
Yeah.
So, and then you see actually the local Ecopetrol, the local oil and gas company, fell down 50% after the election. But then the net impact of his reforms are about 15%. So you can see that the difference, the gap between narrative and reality. And it's the complete opposite in Western countries where people see the UK and Canada and Ireland as tier A jurisdictions, and they're just passing all these windfall taxes. I don't
I,
remember the
I
numbers
would,
exactly for the
yeah, I,
UK, but they're much higher. And I read Ireland passed some law, some windfall tax law for oil and gas companies above a certain threshold, a 75% tax. That's not, and that is being priced like a tier A jurisdiction, and Colombia is being priced like a tier D jurisdiction.
yeah,
So, maybe they're all just tier C jurisdictions, but there's an issue with perception. So that's what I'm trying to exploit. But again, being fully aware that it's not that simple, there are risks, etc. But I do
yeah.
see an opportunity.
Okay. You touched a lot on the kind of side of a bit of the macro and the political side of Colombia. Do you see, say, for example, you touched on Brazil. What do you see there in terms of property and why that, again, it's got a very kind of different political scheme going left to right and kind of a bit like in the US in the middle. Whereabouts do you see opportunities
I
there and how?
I'm not too much of an expert on Brazil. However, assets are quite cheap. When you look at Petrobras, the way it's sold off, so the national oil company in Brazil, when Lula was elected, and what he's actually done since then, which is actually give Petrobras a break and not really impact. And when he appointed a new CEO, it's just a very technical guy that has 30 years of experience,
Yeah,
not some ideological Marxist. Again, there's a gap between perception and reality on the ground. And I'm not saying that reality on the ground is perfect. All I'm saying is that the perception is a lot worse, which is the opposite of Western countries at this stage, especially Europe,
yes,
for example.
yeah. Okay, that's quite interesting. And in other markets in the region, you talked about the Middle East and Malaysia. Malaysia is potentially a bit more of a safer haven. I think a lot of people neglect that. And if you look at the ringgit, it's been undervalued for quite a while. And property there is actually quite cheap for what it is. People just don't realize how developed places like Kuala Lumpur or Penang actually are and how cheap they are. I think even Cambodia's got similar property per square meter as KL, which just makes it insane. But in the Middle East, I know you touched upon Turkey and also Egypt, and I think it was building a new capital city. What are your thoughts on them places as investment? Again, with Turkey with kind of high interest rates,
Oh,
etc. The lira
yeah.
keeps going, whatnot.
So look, you can break down the Middle East in a few different parts. So one, looking at the Gulf from a real estate point of view, looking at places like Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, the UAE, where foreigners can buy real estate. The issue is that real estate in these markets tends to depreciate very quickly from a physical point of view
Yeah,
because the weather is so harsh and because the maintenance culture is so poor and because culturally people who move there always want to stay in the newer flashier building and there's always a newer flashier building being built. So when people invest in these markets, they're often driven by like good yields and they have these amazing brochures and these like showrooms and you
yes,
buy these amazing things and you might get amazing yields for a year or two, but then after year two people move out, they go to the new building, then the tenant quality that you get is a bit lower and then gradually the building just goes on a downhill slope and then it's a bit hard to sell. So you're always racing against the clock in terms of trying to time the market in terms of prices going up versus the actual inherent value of your property going down.
yeah,
So I find that in the Gulf, there are two types of people generally that make money in real estate. It's the developers and it's real estate agents.
yeah,
And also maybe a third one, active flippers and speculators. But people who just go in there to buy and hold, in 85% of cases, it just doesn't, I'd say 90% of cases, it's just a bad call. So,
Yeah.
and ultimately, what drives the price of real estate there? It's oil. So, you're buying a if you're buying Gulf real estate, it means you're bullish oil. So if you're bullish oil, why buy an asset
Yeah,
that
just buy
is
oil. Yeah.
exactly, just buy an oil company and then sit down and get higher
Yeah.
dividends
Yeah. Get
and
the
a
dividends.
lot less issue and liquidity and lower transaction costs. So again, then there's more volatility. You need to know when to sell, etc. Buying is easy, selling is hard.
Yeah.
So that's kind of Gulf. If I'm interested in Gulf real estate, I should just slap myself in the face and look at oil majors, that have
Yeah.
good numbers. So
I
that's my
like that
thought on Gulf
advice.
real estate. In terms of Egypt, yeah, they're building a massive new capital city
Yeah.
east of Cairo, like 40 kilometers east of Cairo. No one's talking about it.
It is. Yeah,
It's
I find amazing actually. Whether it'll prosper or
crazy.
not, it's a whole different
It's
thing. But
happening. I mean,
yeah,
with
yeah,
delays, obviously, but they're planning 6 million people there.
better than Saudi
New,
Arabia's neon projects going. So
yeah, yeah, we'll see about that one. So it's actually happening. The Chinese are heavily involved. They're building these skyscrapers and like convention centers and a new palace, and the whole administration of the Egyptian state is expected to move there pretty soon. So it is happening. Now, the issue with Egypt is it's pretty cheap. You can get some apartments for, I don't know, $500 to $700 a square meter, depending on the finishings, which
yeah,
is, pretty cheap. I talked about it about 2, 3 years ago. And what was interesting is that you could get 10-year developer financing in Egyptian pounds. And back then that was the thesis. It was, guys, like, sure, Egyptian real estate, you're gonna wait 2 years for it to be built, and then it's a new city, so I don't know how easily tenants are gonna come, and like, not necessarily that easy, but for a small part of your portfolio, buying Egyptian real estate in what is going to be a massive city at such
yeah,
prices in Egyptian pounds with 10-year developer financing at a fixed rate. That's pretty interesting. It's like essentially short. This is how you short the Egyptian pound with, a hard asset as a guarantee.
yeah,
So people who did that did well, seeing what happened to the Egyptian pound.
yeah,
And they don't seem to be solving their current account deficit. So the devaluations are probably going to continue. So I'd see it as that sort of play. Turkey, Turkey's an interesting one because it's really booming in spite of massive inflation, in spite of a whole bunch of
yeah.
issues. The economy is doing surprisingly well. It's actually been the world's best
Always
performing
performed
market.
outstandingly last year. One of the
Yeah,
only ones that did.
yeah, 75%
Yeah,
in dollar terms in 2022. I mean, this is
crazy.
exceptional. So, and it's this in spite of foreign outflows. So that was mostly driven by locals. And again, there are no capital controls. So locals, it's a bit bureaucratic, but locals can get their money out of Turkey.
Yeah,
And yet they chose to invest in the local stock market. So it's an interesting place. Geopolitically, it's playing its cards fairly well for now. It's
yes,
benefiting from the whole mess in Europe
yeah,
by being the in between,
yeah,
by being, very proficient carpet sellers, just, trading between the two, trying to stay out of it, but doing business with the two sides. So this is extremely helpful. You've had hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Russians that are there in Turkey doing business, setting up companies. That's huge for Turkey. That's very positive.
yeah,
So the property market has really benefited from it. But I'd say that the interesting play for Turkey, but then there's risk. It's
yeah,
historically, when you look at Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, whenever there was war around the Black Sea, apart from World War II, where they were just too tired from World War One,
Yeah.
they get involved at some
Yeah.
point, whether by choice or just by default, they get involved. So there's definitely this definitely needs to be highlighted as a key risk. If the conflict in Europe were to expand, how long can Turkey stay out of it?
Yeah.
That's I don't know, but it's
It's
tail
one of those,
risk.
yeah, questions. Yeah.
But the interesting play I find is the citizenship by investment.
It's
So
been very
all you
popular.
need, yeah, it's huge. $400,000. You invest $400,000 in any real estate anywhere in Turkey. It's not like approved real estate or whatever. Um, and then a few government fees of and lawyer fees of $5,000-$6,000.
Yeah.
And within approximately 7 months, you get citizenship for yourself, your spouse, all your underage children, and then by definition, according to Turkish nationality law, then it just goes down the generations. So a lot of Westerners, so you have a lot of Arabs and Africans doing the program, Iranians as well, because it's a better passport than what they have.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing with my business is an increasing amount of Westerners that are doing
I've
it.
I've had quite a few, yeah, as well. The British that want to get out,
Yeah,
'cause Turkey and
yeah.
US,
And
they've seen it as a good option.
yeah, it's a plan B in an increasingly volatile world. So, it could be either the best decision of one's life or the worst decision of one's life if, suddenly Turkey goes into war and then,
Yeah.
they say that, you have to come back and fight for the republic. That wouldn't be too pleasant. But the reality is if you don't care too much about the West, it's actually a really good passport. It gets you Latin America access, it gets you the Middle East, it gets you Africa, it gets you a lot of Asia.
Yeah.
It's Turkey in the developing world and in the non-aligned nations traditionally is a very respected power.
Yeah.
And we as Westerners do not quite understand this. The average Westerner, you say Turkey, they think cheap holidays in Antalya and like kebab.
Yeah.
But the reality is, Turkey is a military power. Turkey is a diplomatic power. Turkey is a cultural power.
Yeah.
They export a lot of their culture all over, soap opera, et cetera, et cetera. And Turkey is a business power. They're an export power. They export all over the Middle East, all over Africa. When you're in
I agree
Africa,
with
you
that.
see Turkish appliances everywhere, and they're generally seen as better than Chinese.
Yeah. It gets omitted a lot of that fact, and also the population size of
Yeah.
Turkey, and it often gets omitted a lot in the West, and I
Mhm.
don't know why. It always bewilders me that. But
People have their
so,
preconceptions.
yeah.
We all do, but there's a gap between narrative and reality. And
Yeah.
essentially, for just 400K, you can make decent investments. You
Yeah.
can get decent yields. You can get like 5-6% net, which is pretty good in
It's
USD
good. Yeah.
terms. And you make a generational move. So
Yeah.
not only a plan B for yourself, but a generational move. And for example, when doing business in Africa, I travel quite a bit in Africa. I have to say, when I go into some of these countries and I show my passport of the former colony, it's not a positive. I'd be better off showing a Turkish passport.
Yeah.
And again, I know it's hard for people to comprehend that a Turkish passport can be better in some countries, but it actually is, because
Yeah.
they're not seen as shit stirs. They're just doing business, and people appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
And same thing. I mean, we're talking Malaysia.
Yeah.
The place better than I do, but I'm pretty sure that people inherently have a preference for Turks than for Westerners.
Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of places in the world. Yes. I think
There are a
they
lot of
do.
more similarities, the religion, etc. Turkey has managed to to export. It's, I mean, when I'm in Istanbul, I see a lot of Malays. I see a lot of Indonesians. It's a very popular
Same in Western,
destination
yeah.
in the Islamic world. People like Turkey.
And also, I think from the Western, it's better to be have a plan B where somewhere that might be growing, where you see the kind of the downfall of the West. It's on an inevitable down sinking ship. The West, personally,
Mhm.
I see is the Western Europe and America. You may see differently. You'll have different
It,
views. But
I'd say I'd say especially Western Europe right now.
yes, I think
You know,
especially Western Europe.
there's a reason Europeans were using Russian oil and gas because it was cheap and
Yeah,
plentiful, you know. And you take that away and then you replace it with American LNG that's 2, 3 times more expensive. Well, guess what? Europeans become uncompetitive. The whole cost structure of the continent goes up. Production's going to move away. And at the same time, what would have been our oil is being shipped off to Asia at a discount because of the sanctions. So
yeah.
we're punishing ourselves and giving the competitors a big boost, and then we're surprised that things aren't going well. So yeah, like it's hard to be bullish Europe.
Yeah, I think even before the war, it was losing its competitive edge in a lot of ways. I think
Like
the
Europe
reviews.
needs to make peace. Europe
Yeah,
needs to get together, and I know Europeans love to make war every 80 years. It's what Europeans do.
yeah,
Um, it would appear that we're entering another such cycle, unfortunately. And people need to recognize that they should be careful with their European allocations. That's it. If history is an indication.
yeah. And I think a plan B in something like Turkey may not be a bad option for a lot of Europeans right now on that. But just touching on a bit of your services, is that something you help clients with, or have helped clients with? Is the Turkish citizenship by
Yeah,
through property program? Because I really do think
yeah,
that's a good
through
a good
property,
option with that.
specializing really on the secondary market,
Yeah,
where you get normal properties that Turks buy, and then doing renovations, and so you actually
that's
make decent investments.
that's
Yeah,
so much better than a lot of the
yeah,
passport companies you come across. I'm not trying to badmouth too many of them, and I won't name names, but they have these flashy brochures of this new apartment and
yeah,
wherever that's it's not going to real estate. So having someone like you on the ground that knows the secondary market where you get so much better value, know the discount, you could
yeah.
save tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long run on that.
I mean,
Invaluable.
these developers pay commissions of 10%.
Yes.
Some
Yeah.
of them have approached me 10%. I was just
Yes, I've
like,
had the same.
I mean, if you're being offered a
You,
commission of 10%, you're not selling something that's good for your client.
yeah, I've had the same that they'll be 10%. You think, where is the money going? If that's 10%, and they're charging
Yeah.
fees of 30, 40,000 on top of that for the administration
Oh,
of
no,
that. And
5,000 max. 5,000 max.
you're thinking, come
Yeah.
on, this is really milking it. So I think having someone with your knowledge is easily worth a fee like that if anyone was looking for a kind of the Turkish passport and invest in real estate and get a good yield at the same time. So it's kind of a triple positive effect on that.
Yeah. People just need to be careful with their sizing and not not overexpose themselves to, markets like Turkey.
Yeah,
People just need to be careful and reasonable.
yeah. No, so really appreciate it. So if you had, so just to finish on, if you had one kind of hot cake and one potato for in terms of areas, countries, and cities in 2023 for investors, where would it be? So your hot cake first, and then your kind of hot potato. Where would you leave? It could be a region as a whole, for say, for example, Western Europe or something like that. Where would you?
All Look, in spite of all its problems, in spite of all its issues, I can tell you what I'm seeing is many people are moving to Latin America.
Okay.
And it's not low quality people. You have a lot of qualified, well off Western Europeans, North Americans, they're moving down to Latin America for a few reasons. One, because they can, they
Yeah.
can work remotely. Why stay in Toronto when you can work in like
Mexico's
Cancun? Like
been
why?
run, but
Yeah,
Mexico City's basically become like
yeah,
not California right now.
exactly. And then two, if you structure things properly and you can put, as long as you're not American, you can get to a 0% tax rate if you structure your things properly by involving jurisdictions like Panama, like Paraguay. So I've been helping a lot of people with this.
Yeah.
And these countries typically have a bit more freedom as well. So people look for that. And people are also tired of politics in
And
Europe and in North America, where it's just people
also,
are always
yeah,
arguing
also
and
touching
hating
on
each other.
that point in Latin America, if there is going to be a conflict, I'm not saying there will be in Europe, where's a safe
Right.
place you'd want to go? Latin America.
That's it.
It's
And
the
I'm
one
starting
place.
to see people, and to your point, I'm starting to see people that are moving to Latin America because they fear an actual conflict. So you've got people that are just moving just because of the politics, because they don't want to be in a political environment.
Yeah.
Republicans versus Democrats and social wars and blah, blah, like they don't want to get involved in this. They just want to live their lives. They're happy in Latin America. But then I'm also starting to see Europeans who are actively making plan Bs. And I've also come across wealthy Europeans. We're talking lower eight figures that sold everything they had in Europe and they're redeploying the vast majority of it into Latin America. They're getting
Wow.
residencies and they're staying and they're saying, our grandparents have seen this. We're just going to chill in Latin America for 5 years and see how things work out.
Some great
A worst
residency
case scenario,
programs.
we'll have lived in Latin America for 4 or 5 years. We'll have learned a lot, learned Spanish, then we can go
Yeah.
back to Europe. So I've come across people like this.
Wow.
It's radical. I'm not
Yeah.
recommending this, but there are people doing this.
Okay. That's interesting. You have some great residency programs in Latin America, for example, Paraguay. It's
Yeah.
$5,000 in a bank, right? You can't get much simpler than that.
Yeah, it's generally pretty easy in Latin America. They have a history of immigration, so it's pretty easy. It's paperwork, but it's easy.
And I guess your kind of hot potato would be Western Europe in terms of property in 2023.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
But
I'm not
that's,
saying this out of happiness.
yeah.
I have family in Europe, etc. A lot of links. I have exposure to Western Europe, so personally, I'm not happy about that either. But yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah.
Okay. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, where would they most find you and how would they do that? So,
Thank you. So the best thing is my website, thewanderinginvestor.com. There's a private list. It's free, so essentially it's a newsletter, and then I write emails and I post videos as I travel around the world looking at unique investments
the
and
content on there is really, really good.
immigration.
I'd recommend anyone to read some of the content because it's really kind of hands-on experience of what you've got from investing. I've read some of the articles and what you've done in Medellin. You've read about Ukraine as well. Um,
Yeah, that didn't go well for me.
Uzbekistan, it's done how you've invested in Uzbekistan, or now invested in. It's been an absolute help on some of that. So I'd recommend anyone to go to that and read the
Yeah,
article.
Ukraine didn't work out. Uzbekistan worked out very well.
I don't think anyone could have seen that. but no, I really appreciate your time and hopefully people can get in touch and can at least find some of the articles useful because I really do think they should get to the articles and read some of the hands down experiences that you've gone through and do.
Cool. Thank you, Henry.